Nintendo Switch or Nintendo Switch OLED? Is it worth the upgrade? Let's find out. Hey guys, and welcome back to SHS Gaming. It's Katie here from Smart Home Sounds, and we've got a really exciting video for you today as we're going to be taking a look at the brand new Switch OLED from Nintendo. This is the latest version of the Switch, version 4 if we're keeping count. So we'll be reviewing what's new and comparing it with the regular Switch to help you decide if it's worth the upgrade or not. We've had the OLED in the office for the last few days and we've been testing it out with lots of new games, including Metroid Dread. So we've got some really exciting results to share with you. But before I get into the video, make sure you hit that like button, and if you enjoyed this review, why not subscribe while you're here so you don't miss out on any more of our gaming content. So first things first, no matter which Switch you buy, you'll be able to play the exact same Nintendo games on both. This is extremely important to know, as Nintendo has not limited any of its game compatibilities based on the version of the Switch you own, and it doesn't appear that they will do this in the future either. Every Switch console can play every Switch game either through a cartridge or a digital download, and this definitely feels like a smart move by Nintendo. It means if you guys have a Switch and fancy the upgrade, you don't have to rebuy any of the games you already own, and who doesn't love saving money? First things first, let's chat price. There's only £50 or so between the two, with the Switch retailing at $259 and the OLED at $309.99. Now, quite a lot of the basics have stayed the same. Both can be used in handheld mode and come with two Joy-Con controllers and a Joy-Con grip. They also come with a dock, which means you can connect them to your TV and detach the Joy-Cons for multiplayer sessions. And you can use your regular Switch dock with the new console and vice versa. They've also kept the same attachment design for the Joy-Cons, which means you can use any controller you've got for the Switch or the Switch OLED if you're upgrading. They both use the same straightforward OS to navigate through games and apps and support Wi-Fi connectivity, Bluetooth audio, and a handful of USB-C accessories. Internally, both models use the same NVIDIA Tegra X1 processor and have the same 720 line resolution. The docked output is still 1080p, but the base storage does jump up from 32GB to 64GB on the OLED. Battery life stays the same across both models too, which is interesting and something I want to chat about a bit later on. But let's just go back a bit and take a closer look at both Switches. Side by side, you can see the screen size difference. Where the Switch has a 6.2-inch screen, the OLED boasts a slightly larger screen of 7 inches. However, it's important to highlight that the models are still roughly the same size and weight. There's not a huge difference there, and I hardly noticed the difference in testing. This essentially means they're making the most of the form factor of the Switch, and the bigger screen does make quite a big difference in immersion when playing games handheld. In terms of overall design, there are some smaller details to point out. So for example, the redesigned dock has been substantially updated in terms of styling, and its back can now be completely removed to access its AC adapter, HDMI output, and LAN connection, rather than swinging out on a hinge. Personally, this design to me feels a lot more premium, and the kickstand is definitely a lot sturdier, which I really appreciate. It's now the full width of the back of the Switch, which is not only sturdier, but also lets you prop the Switch up at different angles. The kickstand on the original Switch is tiny, and it's not really the most reliable at supporting the Switch in desktop mode. The OLED kickstand can also be adjusted to different angles, which makes it a lot better suited for playing in a desktop mode. I also prefer the thinner bezel around the screen on the OLED, but for some reason I do feel like people might feel the original Switch is a bit more reliable if you've got kids, maybe because there's less screen to smash. So if you're getting this for young kids, potentially that could end up being a factor for you. Both come in multiple colour options, the classic neon option included, but the Switch OLED comes in a nice clean white version, which we have here, with a matching white dock. This is usually black, so I really like this. Of course, there will probably be more colour options made available and special launches. We'll just have to wait and see for that. By far the most notable difference between these two models is the OLED screen. Now, if you're not familiar, an OLED panel has self-illuminating pixels, which give more control over the image with better contrast and higher brightness. This means you can experience true blacks, a deeper contrast, brighter colour payoff, and a wider viewing angle. The original Switch with an LCD screen struggles more with contrast and blacks and can even look grey at times, so this OLED screen is a step up here. In our testing, we could clearly see that Nintendo OLED screen is markedly brighter. We played Legends of Zelda and found that there seemed to be a large range of colours that are far more vibrant and slightly more saturated in comparison to the Switch. If you do use your device handheld often and out and about in bright daylight when you'd be dealing with reflections and that kind of thing, then I think you will see a big difference in the gaming experience with the OLED. Another thing to note is that there is a vivid mode on the OLED Switch. This is a brand new feature which is exclusive to this model and is on automatically by default out the box. If you're familiar with the vivid mode on TVs, then this is essentially the same thing and just helps boost saturation, push the colors to the max brightness, and offer even better contrast. I have to say, Metroid Dread looked awesome on the Switch OLED. It feels like it was made to be played on the OLED, with the darker vibe and the contrast made this game in particular pop off. You can see here the colors are really vibrant and the contrast just makes everything stand out that much more. Of course, if you tend not to use your Switch handheld often, or you don't play it outside or in bright light a lot, then this means it won't make a big difference to your playing experience. At least not enough to spend extra money on an upgrade if you already have the original Switch. It's also worth noting that with the OLED, there is the possibility of getting burn-in. However, I want to emphasize that this is hard to do, especially on gaming devices, and the only reason you should be worried about burn-in is if both of these apply to you. Number one, you play mainly one game, particularly a retro game, due to its likely static UI elements. And number two, you exclusively play in handheld mode for hours on end, every single day, for years. So in reality, it's only something to really consider if either of those sound like they could apply to you, but I don't think it's something to get too worried about, especially with a gaming device. Essentially, if you play your Switch a couple of hours a week and switch back and forth between handheld and TV mode, you should never even get close to getting that unwanted burn-in. Now, as I mentioned at the start, both models have the same NVIDIA custom Tegra processor and they both have the same RAM. That means that this new model isn't benefiting from any upgrade in power over the original Switch, so you're not going to find any upgrades in your gaming experience there. This can be viewed as both a positive and a negative, but personally, I think it's a positive, as it means you can use the same games as the original Switch, but now they'll look richer and more immersive thanks to the OLED screen. The base Switch and the Switch OLED can both be connected to TV without an issue, as each one comes with a dock. However, the docks are slightly different though. The Switch OLED dock comes with a built-in Ethernet port, whereas the base Switch doesn't. So obviously that means if you want to use a LAN connection in dock mode, then getting the Switch OLED is a no-brainer for that reason alone. For those who might not be familiar with a LAN connection or Ethernet port, means you can connect the Switch dock up to your home router for a more reliable signal compared with Wi-Fi connection, which will of course help reduce any lag on online gaming. I know that some people were hoping that the OLED dock would offer 4K output, but unfortunately, just like the regular Switch, the max output resolution you're going to get is 1080p. And I don't think I mentioned it earlier when talking about the screens, but the OLED also only offers up 720p in handheld mode, the same as the regular Switch. As I already mentioned, the Nintendo Switch OLED and base Switch have exactly the same controller options. By default, they come with two detachable Joy-Cons. You can combine both of them in a controller mount. You can play with one in each hand, or you can even use each Joy-Con as a tiny standalone controller. Obviously, this is great if you want to get in some spontaneous multiplayer matches going, which is something we've been doing all week and taking full advantage here in the office with some pretty serious Mario Kart racing. We're actually currently in the middle of a very serious Mario Kart tournament, so make sure you're following us on Instagram @SmartHomeSounds to see who takes the crown and the glory. I'm holding out hope for this victory. Anyway, back to the review. Another key difference between the two systems is their internal storage capacity, as mentioned from the start. The Switch OLED comes with double the internal storage of the standard Switch, clocking in at 64 gigabytes, so not a huge upgrade, but an upgrade nonetheless. This is definitely a plus if you're planning on downloading your games rather than purchasing the physical copy. But at the end of the day, you're still probably going to want to buy a hard copy too with that sort of level of storage. Obviously, we know that both of these models have the same battery life on paper, which is something between 4.5 hours and 9 hours, depending on what you're playing. Of course, battery life does depend on the games that you play as to how much battery you can get out of these, but you should get around 4.5 hours to 9 hours from both the original and the OLED. I do think the OLED would have benefited from bumping the battery life up a bit. Not that the battery life is too bad, but with every upgrade you always hope that the developers will improve the battery life of consoles, especially when it comes with a price increase. Although saying that, both are obviously a big upgrade on paper from the previous version of the Switch, which was around 2.5 to 6.5 hours. The screen on the OLED model is bigger, but it's also more power efficient, thanks to the self-illuminating pixels, so no power is wasted lighting areas that don't need to be lit. The combination of a slightly bigger screen but more efficient panel type might, in theory, cancel each other out, but in our own testing, the Switch OLED got 5 hours of battery life, whilst the V2 lasted for 4 hours and 40 minutes. So the Switch OLED probably has the edge on battery life amongst the variety of models, but your exact playtime can change dramatically depending on the game, the screen brightness, the volume, and so on. So the final change we need to discuss is the audio. Nintendo have been a bit non-committal about the actual audio specs, but the new OLED apparently has improved speakers that can offer both louder and more detailed sound performance than the original Switch. From our testing, you can tell there has been some upgrade. The audio is definitely a step up, which does offer a better gaming experience. Personally, I tend to use a headset when I'm gaming handheld, but I do appreciate the upgrade nonetheless. Okay, let's start to wrap this up then and decide if the OLED is really worth the upgrade. So for me, if you have the original V1 Switch model that has the original battery life and is maybe starting to look a little worse for wear after years and years of use, then it might be worth the upgrade. If you have the V2 already, but really want to upgrade, I think you could look into reselling it, and then you only have to budget for the difference, so it's just not such a jump. But if you do already have the V2, which you enjoy playing, and it is in good condition, it just doesn't feel like a ton of return for spending that much more money to get a system that plays the same games you can already play in a very similar way. I mean, I've got the V2 Switch and I just don't think there's enough change here for me to upgrade when I'm happy with what I've got. I'm holding out for either a model with an upgraded battery or 4K. I think either of those would have swayed me, so I've got my fingers crossed for the rumored Switch Pro. So the OLED does definitely feel like an upgrade and the visuals are great, so I do think there will be a lot of people out there who want to experience that enhanced immersion along with the other tweaks and updates on this model. If you haven't got any Switch models and you're deciding which model to get outright, then having now played with the OLED and having seen the difference between the two in real life, hands down, I would tell you to invest in the OLED. I think the screen is a big upgrade for handheld play. You've got the option for a hardwired connection when you've got it docked to reduce lag when you're playing on the TV, and you've got double the storage if you're someone who downloads their games. At the end of the day, it comes down to how you want to use your Switch. Families might prefer to opt for the V2 Switch and use that extra budget for a second pair of controllers or another game, while someone who's buying it for personal gaming would probably prefer to get a bit more out of the upgraded screen. And after testing it out these last few weeks, I can definitely see why people would upgrade. Ultimately, guys, we're here to offer our opinions from testing, but you'll have to decide for yourselves which one is right for you. So comment down below which Switch you go for. Are you team V2 or are you team OLED? Links for both models are in the description below if you want to check either of them out, and feel free to get in touch if you need any help. Hopefully you enjoyed this video, and don't forget to drop us a like if you found it helpful, and subscribe if you want to catch more content from us. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.